He didn't wear a cape or possess the sculpted physique of a Greek god. He was the ultimate everyman, the guy with the receding hairline and a smirk, who walked barefoot over broken glass, bled on screen, and saved the world armed with nothing but a Beretta and a legendary, fast-talking wit. He redefined the action hero by proving that true toughness means being willing to hurt. But behind the billion-dollar box office lies a reality that breaks the heart. At 71 years old, Bruce Willis is fighting a quiet, unscripted battle. Struck first by aphasia and then by frontotemporal dementia (FTD), he faces a ruthless, incurable neurological disease that is systematically erasing his ability to speak, comprehend, and connect with the world. There is a devastating irony to his story. A boy who fought a crippling childhood stutter, he built a cinematic empire out of dialogue, only to be forced into an agonizing goodbye, slowly returned to the very silence he once fought so hard to escape. How does a man built on fast-talking charisma endure a disease that locks him inside his own mind? What hidden agonies did he suffer in his final years on set, struggling to remember lines while the internet unknowingly mocked his decline? And when the ultimate action hero can no longer save the day, how does his blended family, his wife Emma, ex-wife Demi Moore, and 5 daughters, unite to form an unbreakable shield to save him? Before we answer these questions, we must go back to the beginning. To understand the fading legend, you must first know the boy trapped in silence. The boy trapped in silence and the miracle of the stage. There is a common assumption that actors are born with an insatiable desire to be looked at. We imagine they're drawn to the stage by ego, by a hunger for applause, or by the simple, dazzling allure of the spotlight. But for a rare few, the stage is not a pedestal. It is a sanctuary. For some, acting is not a profession. It is the only viable escape route from a prison they did not build. Walter Bruce Willis was born on March 19, 1955, on a military base in the town of Oberstein, West Germany. His father, David, was an American soldier, and his mother, Marlene, was a local German woman who worked in a bank. When Bruce was just 2 years old, his father's deployment ended, and the family crossed the Atlantic, eventually settling in the tough, unapologetically blue-collar town of Penns Grove, New Jersey. Penns Grove was a place of oil refineries, chemical plants, and hard labor. It was a town where men worked until their hands were permanently calloused and their backs ached. It was an environment that demanded a certain kind of rugged, unspoken toughness from its boys. But young Bruce carried a vulnerability that he could not hide behind a tough exterior. From the moment he began to speak, he was burdened with a severe, debilitating stutter. To understand the true, heartbreaking irony of Bruce Willis's life and the tragic poetry of the disease he battles today at 71, you must first understand the absolute agony of his childhood. A stutter is not merely a speech impediment. It is a psychological cage. Imagine possessing a sharp, vibrant mind, brimming with jokes, complex thoughts, and intense emotions. But the moment you open your mouth to share them with the world, your throat locks. The syllables betray you. The harder you try to force the words out, the more tightly your jaw clenches, until you are left gasping for air, staring into the impatient, pitying, or mocking eyes of the people listening to you. For a boy growing up in a rough-and-tumble New Jersey neighborhood, showing weakness was an open invitation for cruelty. The schoolyard is a merciless arena, and Bruce endured the relentless taunts and the suffocating embarrassment of being the kid who could not finish a simple sentence. Sometimes it took him 3 agonizing minutes just to complete a single thought. The frustration was physically exhausting. He was a prisoner inside his own mind, possessing a fast-paced intellect that was entirely trapped behind a broken vocal cord. To survive the bullying, Bruce developed his first great defense mechanism, his sense of humor. He realized that if he could make the other kids laugh, they would stop laughing at him. He became the class clown. He leaned heavily into physical comedy, using his face, his exaggerated expressions, and his signature smirk, a subtle, half-smiling, half-defiant lifting of the lip, to communicate what his stuttering voice could not. That smirk, which would one day become his billion-dollar Hollywood trademark, was not born in an acting class. It was born in the hallways of a New Jersey high school as a desperate shield against humiliation. But humor was only a temporary bandage. The true miracle, the singular event that would alter the trajectory of his entire existence, happened entirely by accident when he walked into the high school drama department. Bruce decided to try out for a school play. It was a terrifying proposition for a boy who could barely string 3 words together in casual conversation. But the moment he stepped onto the wooden planks of the stage, something completely inexplicable happened. He was handed a script. He memorized the words. And when he stood under the stage lights and opened his mouth to deliver the lines of the fictional character, the stutter completely vanished. It was as if a heavy, suffocating weight had been instantly lifted from his chest. The words flowed out of him with a crisp, fluid, and commanding resonance. He was articulate. He was loud. He was completely, wonderfully free. Years later, neurologists and speech therapists would explain this phenomenon. When a person who stutters takes on a persona, when they adopt the cadence, the rhythm, and the emotional intent of a written character, it bypasses the neurological roadblocks in the brain that cause a stammer. But to a teenage Bruce Willis, it wasn't science. It was magic. Acting was not a hobby for Bruce Willis. It was a medical necessity. It was a wheelchair for a boy with broken legs. When he was playing a character, he was no longer the awkward, bullied kid from Penn's Grove who couldn't finish a sentence. He was whoever he wanted to be. The theater became his ultimate sanctuary. It was the only place on earth where he was given profound, basic human dignity of being heard. Despite discovering his incredible, liberating superpower, the path out of New Jersey was not immediate. When he graduated from high school in 1973, the blue-collar reality of his hometown pulled him in. His parents had separated. The financial realities of life were pressing, and Hollywood felt like an impossible, distant planet. Bruce went to work. He took a job as a security guard at the Salem nuclear power plant. He drove transport trucks for the DuPont Chambers Works factory. He even worked briefly as a private investigator, learning the gritty, street-smart rhythms of regular people, a cadence he would later inject into every iconic character he played. He spent years wearing steel-toed boots, carrying lunch pails, and doing the grueling, invisible labor that keeps America running. But the siren song of the stage never stopped calling to him. The boy who had finally found his voice could not bear the thought of spending the rest of his life returning to the silence of the factories. He enrolled in the drama program at Montclair State University, further honing his craft, before finally making the terrifying, necessary leap. In his early 20s, he packed his bags, left the refineries of New Jersey behind, and crossed the river into the chaotic, unforgiving, and fiercely competitive streets of New York City. He did not arrive in Manhattan with a trust fund or industry connections. He arrived with a slightly receding hairline, an unconventional face, and an absolute, burning desperation to keep speaking. To pay the rent for a tiny, unheated apartment in Hell's Kitchen, Bruce became a bartender at a popular, art-centric club called Kamikaze. He wasn't just pouring drinks. He was performing. He would slide across the bar, spin bottles, crack jokes with the patrons, and play his harmonica with local R&B bands. The bar was his second stage. It was here that he perfected the rapid-fire, wise-cracking persona that would soon make him famous. He was developing a rhythm, a fast, musical delivery of dialogue that compensated for all those childhood years when he couldn't speak at all. He was a hustler in the truest sense of the word. He auditioned for off-Broadway plays by day and poured drinks until 4 a.m. He was rejected constantly. Casting directors didn't know what to do with him. He wasn't classically handsome like Richard Gere, and he wasn't a brooding theatrical method actor like Al Pacino. He was just Bruce, a guy from New Jersey who looked like he could fix your plumbing, but spoke with the sharp, electric timing of a stand-up comedian. The boy trapped in silence had broken the lock on his cage. Now, he just had to convince the rest of the world to listen, and the opportunity to do just that was about to arrive in the form of a television script that would change his life and the landscape of Hollywood forever. The blue-collar hustle and the fast-talking miracle. New York City in the early 1980s was not a place that handed out miracles to those who simply waited for them. It was an island of concrete and noise, a grueling, unforgiving proving ground that demanded absolute resilience. For a young man from a blue-collar New Jersey town, making a living in Manhattan meant submitting to a relentless, exhausting hustle. Between 1980 and 1984, Bruce Willis was not walking red carpets. He was walking the sticky, beer-soaked floors of Cafe Central and the Kamikaze Club in Hell's Kitchen. He was a bartender. He lived in a cramped, walk-up apartment where the winter wind howled through poorly sealed windows, surviving on tips, cheap pizza, and the desperate, burning hope that someone, someday, would give him a script. He was performing in obscure, off-Broadway plays, most notably as an understudy in Sam Shepard's gritty masterpiece, Fool for Love. But the theater paid in applause, not in rent money. Yet, looking back, Bruce never romanticized his poverty, nor did he ever pity himself. He understood the profound value of the grind. Years later, reflecting on his journey with that signature, grounded humility, he would explicitly state the unvarnished truth of his origins. I'm a working-class guy who got lucky. I never forget where I come from. When you spend your life carrying a lunch pail or pouring drinks until 4 a.m, you don't take a single second of this business for granted. That working-class identity was not an act. It was written into the very architecture of his face. He did not look like the traditional, polished Hollywood leading men of the era. The 1980s television landscape was dominated by the immaculate, blow-dried perfection of actors like Don Johnson and Tom Selleck. Bruce, by contrast, was a guy whose hairline was already beginning a slow, undeniable retreat. He had a crooked smile, a nose that looked like it had survived a few neighborhood arguments, and a cynical, world-weary squint. But he possessed a secret weapon, the very same weapon he had forged to survive the bullies in New Jersey: his voice. By the summer of 1984, Bruce was 29 years old. The window for a breakthrough in Hollywood is notoriously narrow, and he was dangerously close to watching it slam shut. He scraped together whatever money he had left and boarded a flight to Los Angeles. Officially, he told his friends he was just going to the West Coast to watch the 1984 Summer Olympics. Unofficially, he was going to audition for a few television pilots before his bank account completely evaporated. One of those pilots was a romantic detective comedy for the ABC network called Moonlighting. The creator of the show, Glenn Gordon Caron, was frantically searching for an actor to play the male lead, David Addison, a fast-talking, insubordinate, aggressively charming private investigator. The network had already auditioned nearly 3,000 actors for the role. 3,000 handsome, classically trained, impeccably dressed men had walked into the room, read the lines, and failed to capture the manic, lightning-in-a-bottle energy the script demanded. And then Bruce Willis walked through the door. The visual contrast was almost comical. While the other actors sat in the waiting room wearing tailored suits and rehearsing with pristine posture, Bruce arrived wearing a torn t-shirt, baggy fatigue pants, and scuffed combat boots. He had a punk rock attitude and a smirk that suggested he already knew the joke was on them. The ABC executives took one look at the rough-around-the-edges bartender from New Jersey and were instantly repulsed. According to Hollywood legend, one network executive explicitly told the casting director, "We cannot put this guy on television. He looks like a mugger. He doesn't look like a leading man. He looks like the guy the leading man beats up in the first act." But Glenn Gordon Caron saw something entirely different. When Bruce opened his mouth to read the dialogue, the temperature in the room completely changed. The script for Moonlighting was notorious. It was written in the rapid-fire, overlapping style of classic 1940s Howard Hawks screwball comedies. The dialogue required an actor to fire off words with the speed and precision of a machine gun. It was a terrifying linguistic hurdle for even the most seasoned actors. But for Bruce Willis, the boy who had spent his entire childhood paralyzed by a severe stutter, the boy who used to take 3 agonizing minutes just to finish a single sentence, this rapid-fire dialogue was not a challenge. It was a victory lap. When he delivered the lines, his voice possessed a crisp, electric, and undeniably musical rhythm. He didn't just read the words. He danced with them. He threw the lines back at the casting directors with an effortless, sarcastic, and overwhelmingly charismatic swagger. He completely dominated the room. He was paired for a chemistry read with a female lead, Sybil Shepherd, a bona fide, icy blonde movie star. The friction between the elegant, polished Hollywood royalty and the gritty, wisecracking New Jersey bartender was instantaneous and explosive. It was raw, unadulterated television magic. Against the fierce objections of the network brass, Karen fought a brutal boardroom war and insisted on casting the unknown bartender. On March 3, 1985, Moonlighting premiered to the American public. To say that it was a success would be a catastrophic understatement. It was a cultural earthquake. Overnight, Bruce Willis skyrocketed from a broke, off-Broadway understudy pouring drinks in Hell's Kitchen to the most electrifying presence on national television. Audiences were absolutely mesmerized by his character. David Addison was chaotic, hilarious, and deeply flawed, but it was his voice that became his absolute superpower. The show frequently featured scripts that were twice as thick as standard television episodes, packed with complex, winding monologues that required Bruce to speak at a breathtaking, dizzying speed. It is here that we must pause and acknowledge the profound, almost unbelievable poetic triumph of this moment. Look closely at the screen during those early episodes of Moonlighting. Look at the sheer joy in his eyes as he delivers a 5-minute, unbroken barrage of rapid-fire dialogue. This is the boy who was bullied mercilessly because his throat would lock up in front of his classmates. This is a child who was trapped in the terrifying, humiliating cage of his own silence. I had a severe stutter, Bruce once confessed, recounting his earliest battles in a rare, deeply vulnerable interview. But then I did some theater, and as soon as I stepped on the stage, I stopped stuttering. And I went, "This is a miracle. I've got to investigate this." The theater saved my life. He didn't just investigate the miracle, he weaponized it. The boy who could not speak had grown up to become the fastest, sharpest, and highest-paid talker in American television. He won an Emmy Award. He won a Golden Globe. He became an international superstar, proving that a human brain, despite its deepest flaws and neurological roadblocks, can be completely rewired by sheer willpower and the transformative magic of art. It is a beautiful, magnificent victory. But as we look back on those brilliant, fast-talking days from the vantage point of the present, knowing the dark, inescapable medical shadow that is waiting for him at the age of 71, that victory takes on incredibly heavy, devastating resonance. The very instrument that saved him from obscurity, his sharp, immaculate command of language, was the exact instrument the universe would one day decide to slowly, cruelly dismantle. By 1987, Bruce Willis was the undisputed king of television. But television, no matter how lucrative, has a ceiling. The Hollywood film industry still viewed him strictly as a comedian, a funny, wisecracking guy in a suit who was great for a laugh, but entirely incapable of carrying a massive, explosive summer blockbuster. The major film studios were looking for mountains of muscle. They were looking for Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. They were not looking for a balding, sarcastic guy from New Jersey. But Destiny had already written a script about a massive glass tower in Los Angeles, a group of heavily armed terrorists, and a barefoot cop trapped in the air ducts. The ultimate everyman was about to trade his tailored suits for a blood-soaked undershirt. And in doing so, he was about to completely redefine the definition of modern masculinity. The bleeding hero and the redefinition of masculinity. To fully comprehend the cinematic earthquake that Bruce Willis caused in the late 1980s, you must first understand the rigid, almost cartoonish landscape of Hollywood action films at the time. The era was entirely dominated by physical demigods. Audiences were flocking to theaters to watch Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger, men with impossibly sculpted, oiled physiques, wielding massive machine guns, who could walk through a hail of bullets without ever breaking a sweat or shedding a single tear. They were not playing human beings. They were playing mythological titans. They were invincible. And then there was Bruce Willis. By the winter of 1987, Bruce was a charming, fast-talking star of television comedy. He was famous, yes, but he was certainly not considered dangerous. He had a receding hairline. He carried a little bit of softness around the edges. He looked like the guy sitting next to you at a New Jersey sports bar, not a lethal weapon. So, when 20th Century Fox was casting the lead role for a high-octane thriller taking place in a lockdown Los Angeles skyscraper, Bruce Willis was not on their list. The script, which would eventually become the legendary Die Hard, was offered to everyone else. Frank Sinatra had the contractual right of first refusal. Clint Eastwood, Sylvester Stallone, Burt Reynolds, and Richard Gere all passed on the project. The studio executives were desperate. They needed a leading man, and in a massive, highly controversial gamble, they offered the role of New York City cop John McClane to the television comedian. To convince the industry to take a TV actor seriously, the studio paid Bruce an unprecedented, staggering sum of $5 million. It was a headline-grabbing contract that infuriated established movie stars and caused critics to mock the production before the cameras even rolled. Nobody believed the wisecracking bartender from Hell's Kitchen could carry a heavy action picture. But Bruce Willis stepped onto the sound stages of Nakatomi Plaza with a profoundly different vision of what a hero should be. He looked at the script, looked at the director, John McTiernan, and made a creative decision that would permanently alter the DNA of American cinema. He refused to play John McClane as a fearless superhero. He wanted to play him as a flawed, exhausted, terrified husband who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Reflecting on the creation of this iconic character, Bruce famously explained the radical philosophy behind his performance. I didn't want him to be a superhero. I wanted him to be a guy who's afraid of dying, a guy who complains, who gets hurt, who is genuinely terrified. I wanted to play a guy who is just trying to survive long enough to see his wife again. This was not just an acting choice. It was a profound psychological revolution. Bruce injected his own blue-collar, New Jersey roots directly into the veins of the character. When the terrorists take over the building, John McClane does not strap on a magical suit of armor. He is caught barefoot, wearing cheap slacks and a simple white rib undershirt. As the film progresses, that undershirt becomes a masterpiece of visual storytelling. It transforms from pristine white to gray with dust to brown with grime, and finally to deep, terrifying crimson with his own blood. Bruce allowed himself to be beaten, battered, and pushed to the absolute limits of human physical endurance. And then comes a scene that cemented his immortality. Hunted by heavily armed mercenaries, McClane is forced to run barefoot over a floor completely covered in shattered, bullet-riddled glass. In the sanctuary of a dirty bathroom, panting and shivering from shock, he sits on a sink and begins pulling the jagged shards of glass out of his bleeding, mutilated feet. Look at his face in that scene. He is not stoic. He is not pretending it doesn't hurt. He is weeping. He is gasping in pure agony. And in a moment of absolute breathtaking vulnerability, he picks up a walkie-talkie to speak with Sergeant Al Powell, a cop down on the street. Bleeding, exhausted, and utterly convinced that he is not going to survive the night, he delivers a message for his estranged wife. He doesn't deliver a tough guy monologue. He delivers a desperate, heartbroken confession. He admits that he was too stubborn, too proud, and that he loves her. He begs another man to tell his wife that he is sorry. Audiences had never seen a mainstream action star do this. They had never seen an American hero cry, apologize, and bleed so profusely while admitting his own profound terror. It was raw. It was incredibly intimate. Bruce Willis proved to the world that true courage is not the absence of fear. True courage is being absolutely terrified, physically broken, entirely outgunned, and still forcing your bleeding feet to take the next agonizing step. When Die Hard exploded into theaters on July 15th, 1988, it was a cultural revelation. The critics were silenced. The $5 million gamble paid off tenfold. Bruce Willis became an instant global cinematic icon. The movie shattered the mold of the 1980s action genre, giving birth to the era of the everyman hero. Working-class men sitting in darkened theaters across the globe did not just admire John McClane. They saw themselves in him. But there's a deeper, incredibly poignant layer to the magic of Die Hard, a layer that connects directly back to the little boy in New Jersey and forward to the tragic reality of his twilight years. Throughout the entirety of the film, as John McClane crawls through claustrophobic metal air ducts, lighting matches in the dark, he is constantly talking to himself. He mutters jokes. He complains about his life. He uses a stolen walkie-talkie to taunt the brilliant, sophisticated villain, Hans Gruber, played masterfully by Alan Rickman. Why does he talk so much? Because for Bruce Willis's character, language is his primary weapon of survival. The fast-talking wit, the cynical jokes, the continuous stream of dialogue. These are the psychological lifelines that keep the character from surrendering to panic. Just as acting and speaking words on a high school stage had saved young Bruce from the suffocating cage of his childhood stutter, John McClane uses his voice to keep himself alive in the dark. His voice was his ultimate superpower. It was the instrument that allowed a balding bartender to conquer Hollywood. It was the tool that made him the highest-paid television actor, the ultimate action star, and the beloved icon of a generation. It is here that the heartbreaking, crushing weight of destiny makes itself known. When we watch Die Hard today, we are watching a man at the absolute peak of his linguistic and physical powers. We watch him manipulate his enemies, comfort his friends, and save the hostages entirely through the magnetic, electric force of his speech. And yet, we watch it knowing the cruel, unscripted ending that awaits him 3 decades later. We watch it knowing that the universe, in an act of almost unimaginable, tragic irony, will slowly introduce a neurological thief into his mind. We watch it knowing that the hero who survived a towering inferno by talking his way through flames is currently fighting a brave, silent battle against frontotemporal dementia, a disease that is systematically locking away the very words that built his empire. The hero who saved the world with his voice is being slowly forced to return to the silence. By the dawn of the 1990s, Bruce Willis was standing on the summit of the Hollywood mountain. He was untouchable. He had redefined modern masculinity, married a beautiful movie star, and possessed the kind of wealth and fame that most men cannot even fathom. But the film industry is a remarkably fickle, unforgiving beast. The summit is a dangerous place to stand, because the only direction left to go is down. As he entered the most turbulent, experimental, and incredibly risky decade of his career, the man who had seemingly mastered the action genre was about to take off the bloody undershirt. He was about to embark on a professional roller coaster that would test his limits as an artist, leading him to a desperate creative gamble with a young director named Quentin Tarantino, and ultimately to a quiet, supernatural masterpiece about ghosts that would prove, once and for all, the profound, magnificent depths of his cinematic soul. The roller coaster, the boxer, and the symphony of silence. There is a dangerous, intoxicating altitude that a man reaches when he becomes the biggest movie star in the world. The air gets incredibly thin. The yes men multiply. And the very qualities that made the world fall in love with you, in Bruce Willis's case, the relatable vulnerability and the sarcastic underdog smirk, can easily curdle into hubris if left unchecked. By the dawn of the 1990s, Bruce Willis was commanding $15 million a picture. He had a private jet. He was married to Demi Moore, making him the undisputed, dazzling royalty of the Hollywood establishment. But the Hollywood machine is a relentless beast that feeds on the mighty just as eagerly as it feeds on the weak. When you stand at the absolute summit, the only direction left to go is a terrifying freefall. In a frantic attempt to stretch his creative wings and capitalize on his massive fame, Bruce starred in a series of ambitious, wildly expensive films like The Bonfire of the Vanities in 1990 and his passion project Hudson Hawk in 1991. Both films were catastrophic failures. They were not just ignored by audiences. They were gleefully, viciously dismantled by the critics. The media, which had built him up as the working-class hero just 3 years prior, sharpened their knives. They accused him of arrogance. They mocked his acting. The iconic smirk, which had once been a symbol of blue-collar defiance, was suddenly labeled by the press as the arrogant grin of an overpaid superstar. For a brief, agonizing period, the man who had redefined the action genre was branded with the most lethal label in the industry: box office poison. Most actors who experience a public humiliation of this magnitude retreat to their mansions. They fire their agents, hide from the press, and wait for the storm to pass. But Bruce Willis was not raised in a mansion. He was raised in the oil-stained streets of Penns Grove, New Jersey. When a blue-collar worker gets knocked down, he doesn't complain about the dirt. He just changes his boots and goes back to work. In 1994, Bruce made a decision of absolute, breathtaking humility that would completely resurrect his career. A frantic, brilliant young video store clerk turned director named Quentin Tarantino was casting a gritty, non-linear, ultra-violent independent film called Pulp Fiction. The budget was microscopic compared to the studio blockbusters Bruce was used to, but Bruce read the script and recognized a masterpiece. He wanted the role of Butch Coolidge, an aging, desperate boxer who was paid to throw a fight by a mob boss, but refuses to surrender his pride. Bruce didn't demand his $15 million quote. He didn't demand top billing. He begged for the part, accepting the Screen Actors Guild minimum scale, a fraction of his usual salary, just to be in the room. Reflecting on this massive professional gamble, Bruce later explained his unyielding artistic philosophy. You have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to fall on your face. If you just play it safe, if you just take the paycheck and do the same thing over and over, you're dead as an actor. I wanted to work with Quentin because I wanted to be a part of something dangerous again. As Butch Coolidge, Bruce delivered a performance of astonishing, brutal physicality. He stripped away the fast-talking jokes. Butch wasn't a witty superhero. He was a battered, exhausted man clinging desperately to his father's gold watch, a symbol of family legacy and survival. When Bruce's character picks up a samurai sword in a pawn shop to save the very mob boss who was trying to eliminate him, audiences saw a completely different kind of hero. They saw a man governed by a deep, ancient, and bloody code of honor. Pulp Fiction won the Palme d'Or and can permanently change the landscape of modern cinema, and instantly reminded the world that Bruce Willis was not just an action star. He was a fiercely talented, incredibly dangerous actor. By the late 1990s, the Rollercoaster had climbed back to the absolute peak. He saved the Earth from an asteroid in the 1998 global phenomenon Armageddon, cementing his status as the undisputed king of the summer box office. But behind the explosions, the spacesuits, and the massive paychecks, there was a quiet, profound yearning inside of him. The boy who had found his voice on a high school stage wanted to prove that he could break the audience's heart without firing a single bullet. He wanted to strip away the Bruce Willis persona entirely. In 1999, a relatively unknown director named M. Night Shyamalan offered him a script that would allow him to do exactly that. The film was called The Sixth Sense. Bruce was cast as Dr. Malcolm Crowe, a child psychologist attempting to heal a deeply traumatized little boy who claims he can see the dead. To play Malcolm, Bruce had to do the one thing that terrified him the most. He had to be completely, uncomfortably still. Look closely at his performance in The Sixth Sense. It is a masterclass in restraint. He completely removes a famous smirk. The machine gun delivery of his Moonlighting days is entirely gone. He lowers his voice to a gentle, heartbreaking whisper. He acts almost entirely with his eyes that project a bottomless, overwhelming sadness. I had to take all the Bruce Willises out of it. He later said of the role, I wanted to see if I could carry a movie just by listening, just by being a quiet, broken guy trying to fix something he doesn't fully understand. When the film reaches its staggering, unforgettable climax, when Malcolm drops a gold wedding ring on the floor, watches his own breath turn to frost in the cold air, and realizes that he's been a ghost the entire time, the audience does not just gasp at the plot twist. They weep. They weep because Bruce Willis makes them feel the agonizing, crushing weight of a man realizing he can no longer comfort the wife he loves. It was the quietest performance of his entire career, and it was unequivocally his greatest. But today, When we look back at The Sixth Sense from the vantage point of 2026, the film takes on a devastating, almost unbearable new layer of meaning. The poetic tragedy of the performance as Dr. Malcolm Crowe is so closely aligned with his current reality that it feels like a cruel prophecy written by the universe. In the film, Bruce plays a man who is trapped in a fading reality. He sits across from his wife, speaking to her, desperately trying to bridge the gap, but she cannot hear him. A terrible, invisible wall has been placed between them. He is present, but he is slowly fading away, locked inside a solitary existence, struggling to comprehend why the world around him no longer makes sense. At 71 years old, battling the relentless progression of frontotemporal dementia and aphasia, Bruce Willis is living through a terribly similar, heartbreaking isolation. The disease has built an invisible wall between him and the world he loves. The brilliant mind is still in there. The man who loves his family is still sitting in the room. But the bridge of language, the very tool he used to build his empire, to overcome his childhood stutter and to conquer Hollywood, has been burned down by a neurological thief. He is experiencing the long goodbye, a phrase caregivers use to describe the agonizing process of watching someone you love slowly fade into the mist, unable to reach back when you call their name. To watch the loudest, most vibrant man in the room be forced to endure this symphony of silence is a tragedy that defies explanation. It is a cruel reminder that time and biology do not care about box office records. They do not care how many times you save the world on a silver screen. But as the 1990s closed, Bruce Willis did not know the twilight that was waiting for him. He only knew that he had conquered his demons, resurrected his career, and achieved an artistic immortality that no critic could ever take away from him. Yet, the relentless pressure of living a life entirely under the microscope was beginning to fracture the foundation of his most private sanctuary. Just as his professional life was reaching a state of perfect, quiet grace, his highly publicized, intensely scrutinized marriage to Demi Moore was quietly buckling under the strain. The man who had learned how to play a ghost on screen was about to learn how to navigate the painful, messy, and incredibly beautiful reality of an evolving human family. The fractured marriage in the blended sanctuary. There is a relentless, suffocating pressure applied to love when it is forced to exist under the blinding glare of the Hollywood spotlight. A marriage is inherently fragile, a delicate, complex ecosystem built by two flawed human beings trying to navigate the unpredictable tides of life. But when you are the biggest movie star on the planet, and you are married to another reigning superstar, your living room ceases to be a private sanctuary. It becomes a global stage. In November of 1987, at the absolute zenith of his television fame, Bruce Willis married the fiercely talented and incredibly beautiful actress Demi Moore. They were the undisputed king and queen of the 1990s box office. They were young, obscenely wealthy, and magnetically attractive. But more importantly, they were deeply, passionately in love, and they desperately wanted to build a family. Together, they welcomed 3 daughters into the world. Rumor in 1988, Scout in 1991, and Tallulah in 1994. To the outside world, the Willis-Moore household was a picture of absolute, untouchable perfection. But fame is a terrifying magnifying glass that eventually burns whatever it focuses on for too long. The paparazzi were ruthless. They camped outside their gates. They scrutinized every public outing, every facial expression, and every rumor. The punishing schedules of 2 global superstars, spending months apart on different continents shooting blockbuster films, began to slowly, inevitably erode the foundation of their relationship. In 1998, after more than a decade together, the golden couple announced their separation. Their divorce was finalized in October of 2000. In the vicious, bloodthirsty arena of tabloid journalism, an A-list divorce is usually a spectator sport. The media immediately circled the wagons, expecting a brutal, multi-million-dollar courtroom war. They expected leaked secrets, bitter accusations, and the tragic, all too common spectacle of children being used as leverage in a broken home. But Bruce Willis and Demi Moore did something entirely radical. They did something that stunned the cynical machinery of Hollywood and set a profound example for divorced parents around the world. They refused to go to war. Bruce, the man who made a living playing stubborn, unbreakable tough guys on screen, completely dropped his ego. He recognized a profound, undeniable truth. A marriage may end, but family is forever. He and Demi made a quiet, unbreakable pact that their 3 daughters would never, ever have to choose between their mother and their father. Reflecting on the divorce in a remarkably candid interview shortly after the separation, Bruce delivered a quote that stripped away the Hollywood bravado and revealed the mature, deeply grounded man beneath. "I still love Demi. We're very close. We have 3 children who we will continue to raise together, and we're probably as close now as we ever were. We realize we have a lifelong commitment to our kids. Our friendship continues. The institution has been set aside, but the family is intact." This was not a public relations spin. It was the absolute lived reality. They bought houses across the street from each other in Idaho, so the girls could seamlessly walk back and forth. They spent holidays together. They took family vacations as a united front. Bruce Willis proved that true masculinity is not about dominating a room. It is about having the emotional strength to swallow your pride, to forgive, and to redefine a broken relationship for the sake of the children you brought into the world. But despite this beautiful, successful co-parenting dynamic, the romantic architecture of Bruce's life was undeniably empty. As he navigated through his late 40s and into his early 50s, he was, by all conventional metrics, a man who had everything. He was a global icon. He was a devoted father. He had more money than he could ever spend in a single lifetime. Yet, returning to an empty, cavernous mansion after a long day on a movie set carries a specific, echoing kind of loneliness. He became cynical about romance. He convinced himself that his time for finding a great, enduring love had simply passed. He later confessed with striking vulnerability, "I spent the last 10 years single and, for the most part, unhappy, in a dark place. I went from love to love is truly the answer. I had been setting up this whole system of living where I didn't think I needed anybody. But the universe, with its infinite mysterious timing, was preparing to tear down his walls." In 2007, at a mutual friend gym, Bruce met a stunningly beautiful, incredibly grounded model and actress named Emma Heming. Emma was 23 years his junior, but the connection between them bypassed the superficial arithmetic of age. Emma did not care about the Bruce Willis persona. She saw the man, the boy from New Jersey who used to stutter, the protective father, the tired superstar looking for a quiet place to rest his head. Emma brought an overwhelming, radiant sense of calm into his life. She was patient, she was kind, and she possessed a deep, intuitive understanding of the massive, complex family dynamic Bruce had built with Demi and his daughters. On March 21st, 2009, Bruce and Emma were married in a beautiful, sun-drenched ceremony in the Turks and Caicos, and in a visual that completely shattered the fragile egos of traditional Hollywood. Bruce's ex-wife, Demi Moore, and her then-husband, Ashton Kutcher, were sitting in the front row, cheering them on. It was a breathtaking display of emotional maturity. Bruce and Emma went on to welcome 2 beautiful daughters of their own, Mabel in 2012 and Evelyn in 2014. At nearly 60 years old, Bruce Willis was a patriarch of an incredible, sprawling tribe of strong, fiercely independent women. He was a father to 5 daughters. He was surrounded by feminine energy, by laughter, by a kind of chaotic, beautiful grace that completely softened the rough edges of his action star persona. The media marveled at this incredibly modern, blended family. Emma and Demi became genuine, close friends. The older sisters doted on their baby half-sisters. They celebrated birthdays together in matching pajamas. They formed a massive, impenetrable circle of trust, love, and absolute devotion. For the better part of the 2010s, Bruce Willis was living in a state of profound, earned peace. The boy who was once trapped in silence, the blue-collar hustler who fought his way out of a New York bar, the bleeding hero who revolutionized cinema, had finally built the ultimate sanctuary. He had found a love that did not require him to perform, and a family that loved him not for his billions, but simply because he was their girl dad. It felt like the perfect, ultimate Hollywood ending. But this is not a movie. It is real life, and real life does not care about perfect endings. As Bruce crossed into his mid-60s, a subtle, terrifying shift began to occur. A dark, invisible fog was slowly creeping into his brilliant mind. The man who had built his entire empire out of razor-sharp dialogue and lightning-fast reactions began to experience moments of quiet, agonizing confusion. Looking back now, with the devastating clarity of hindsight, we realize something incredibly profound about the universe. The universe did not give Bruce Willis this massive, beautiful, blended family just so he could have happy holidays and perfect photographs. The universe was assembling an army. Fate knew that a terrible, incurable neurological winter was rapidly approaching. Fate knew that the fast-talking hero was going to be violently stripped of his greatest weapon. The universe knew that Bruce Willis, the man who had spent a lifetime saving the world on screen, was going to need someone to save him in reality. And so, it built him a fortress made of women, a wife, an ex-wife, and 5 daughters, an unbreakable shield of love that would stand between him and the dark, terrifying abyss of aphasia and frontotemporal dementia. As the calendar turned toward the year 2020, the legendary smirk began to fade. The fast-talking voice began to stutter, stumble, and eventually fall silent. The long, agonizing goodbye was about to begin, and the ultimate action hero was about to face the most terrifying, unbeatable villain of his entire life. Not with gun in his hand, but entirely disarmed, relying completely on the fierce, unconditional love of the family he had built. The fading light, the cruelest joke, and the father's final sacrifice. There is a terrifying, stealthy nature to cognitive decline. When a physical injury occurs, there is a singular moment of impact, a broken bone, a visible wound, a sudden rush of pain that demands immediate attention. But neurological diseases like aphasia and frontotemporal dementia do not arrive with a loud crash. They behave like a thief in the night. They do not break down the front door. They quietly pick the lock. They sneak into the magnificent architecture of the human brain and begin, cell by cell, to turn the lights off. They steal a word here. They erase a memory there. They blur the edges of comprehension until the person you have known your entire life is left wandering through a thick, invisible fog, desperately trying to find their way back to you. For Bruce Willis, the man who built a billion-dollar empire on the rapid-fire delivery of dialogue, the fog began to roll in during the late 2010s. At first, the signs were subtle. The razor-sharp timing that defined a performance in Moonlighting and Die Hard began to hesitate. He would pause slightly longer before answering a question. He would struggle to retrieve a specific word. In the ordinary world, these moments are easily dismissed as the natural, harmless byproducts of growing older. But on a high-stakes Hollywood movie set, where time is millions of dollars and every syllable is meticulously scripted, a forgotten word is a glaring, unavoidable crisis. What followed is perhaps one of the most tragic, profoundly misunderstood chapters in the history of modern cinema. Between 2015 and 2022, the cultural landscape noticed a strange, perplexing shift in Bruce Willis's career. The legendary A-list superstar, the man who used to command the biggest screens in the world, suddenly began appearing in dozens of low-budget, direct-to-video action thrillers. He was churning out 5, sometimes 10 of these obscure films a year. His appearances in these movies were brief, disjointed, and often filmed in just a few days. The internet, which thrives on cruelty and possesses absolutely no patience for nuance, reacted with ruthless mockery. Film critics and online commentators tore him apart. They coined derogatory terms for these movies, calling them geezer teasers. They accused Bruce of unimaginable greed, claiming he was simply showing up to collect a paycheck while sleepwalking through his scenes. The mockery reached an incredibly ugly crescendo in early 2022 when the Golden Raspberry Awards, a satirical ceremony that hands out prizes for the worst achievement in film, created a special, deeply insulting category exclusively dedicated to worst Bruce Willis performances in a 2021 movie. The world pointed their fingers and laughed at the aging action star. But behind the closed doors of those movie sets, there was absolutely nothing funny happening. There was no greed. There was only a man fighting a terrifying, silent, and losing battle against his own vanishing mind. Those who worked intimately with Bruce during those final years later painted a picture that breaks the heart completely. The reality was that Bruce was struggling to comprehend why he was even on the set. Directors were forced to compress his shooting schedules into half-days because he simply did not have the cognitive stamina to endure more. His dialogue was constantly rewritten on the fly, stripped down from paragraphs to single, manageable sentences. And then there was the earpiece. The media had ruthlessly mocked him for wearing an earpiece, accusing him of being too lazy to memorize his lines. But the earpiece was not a crutch for laziness. It was a desperate lifeline. It was the only way a man suffering from severe aphasia could physically function. A crew member would gently feed him his lines, word by word, into his ear, and Bruce would summon whatever strength he had left to repeat them for the camera. Imagine the sheer, unadulterated agony of that experience. Remember the boy from New Jersey who stuttered so badly he could not finish a sentence. The boy who found his absolute freedom and salvation by memorizing lines on a theater stage. Now, imagine that same man, 50 years later, standing under the hot studio lights, surrounded by strangers, feeling the terrifying sensation of those words being permanently erased from his brain. Imagine knowing that you are losing your superpower, knowing that the people around you are whispering about your decline, and yet forcing yourself to step in front of the camera anyway. Why did he do it? Why subject himself to the humiliation, the exhaustion, and the public ridicule of those low-budget films when he was already a multimillionaire? When you look at the timeline of his disease, a profound, incredibly beautiful truth emerges. Bruce Willis knew that his mind was fading. He knew that a dark, uncompromising winter was rapidly approaching, and that he would soon require immense, lifelong medical care. More importantly, he looked at his wife, Emma, and his two youngest daughters, Mabel and Evelyn, who were just little girls at the time. He took those movies. He wore the earpiece, and he endured the mockery of the world for one simple, magnificent reason. He was a father. He was pushing his failing body and his fracturing mind to the absolute breaking point, stripping away the last remnants of his Hollywood dignity in order to build an impenetrable financial fortress for the women he loved before the clock completely ran out. It was not greed. It was the ultimate, selfless sacrifice. It was John McClane walking barefoot over broken glass one last time, not to save a skyscraper, but to save his family. In the spring of 2022, the fortress was finally complete. Bruce simply could not go on. On March 30th, 2022, the blended Willis family, Emma, Demi, and his 5 daughters, released a joint statement that brought the entire entertainment world to a stunned, grief-stricken halt. They announced that Bruce had been diagnosed with aphasia, a condition impacting his cognitive abilities, and that he was officially stepping away from the career that had meant so much to him. Less than a year later, in early 2023, the family delivered an even more devastating update. The condition had progressed. The final, formal diagnosis was frontotemporal dementia, FTD. FTD is a cruel, uncompromising thief. Unlike Alzheimer's, which primarily targets memory, FTD targets the lobes of the brain responsible for behavior, personality, and language. There are no treatments. There is no cure. It is a slow, one-way journey into the quiet dark. When the truth was finally revealed, the collective shame of the internet was palpable. The critics who had mocked him went silent. The Golden Raspberry Awards hastily retracted their cruel category, issuing a public apology. The world suddenly realized the immense, private suffering of the man they had so easily turned into a punchline. But Bruce Willis was no longer paying attention to the critics, the apologies, or the box office. The noise of Hollywood had completely faded away. The script was over. The cameras were turned off. The man who had given his voice, his energy, and his entire life to entertaining the globe was finally permitted to retreat into the privacy of his own home. He was relieved of his duties as a superstar. He was relieved of his duties as an action hero. He was entirely, wonderfully surrendered to the care of the women who loved him. As the disease inevitably tightened its grip, altering the very fabric of his reality, the incredible family he had built over decades of trial, error, divorce, and forgiveness proved its ultimate worth. The universe had indeed built him an army, and that army was now surrounding his chair, holding his hands, and preparing to walk him through the longest, quietest sunset a hero could ever face. The unbreakable shield and the final silence. There is a profound, almost sacred quality to the silence that now fills the home of Bruce Willis. If you close your eyes and listen to the echo of his monumental life, the contrast is staggering. For over 40 years, his life was defined by the loudest noises imaginable, the deafening explosions of Die Hard, the roaring engines of Armageddon, the rapid-fire, machine-gun dialogue of Moonlighting, and continuous, blinding flashes of the global paparazzi. He was the center of a chaotic, incredibly noisy universe. But today, at 71 years old, the noise has completely vanished. The explosions have faded. The script has been closed. As the cruel, unforgiving progression of frontotemporal dementia, FTD, and aphasia tightens his grip on his brilliant mind, the fast-talking hero has been slowly, inexorably pulled back into the quiet. The neurological thief has accomplished what no cinematic villain ever could. It has disarmed John McClane. It has stolen the words from his tongue and blurred the sharp edges of his reality, wrapping him in a heavy, invisible fog. In the tragic narrative of most Hollywood downfalls, this is the part of the story where the fading star is abandoned. This is where the entourage disappears, the fair-weather friends stop calling, and the aging icon is left to wander through the cavernous halls of an empty mansion, completely alone. But Bruce Willis is not alone, and he is certainly not abandoned. To look at Bruce Willis in the year 2026 is to witness one of the most magnificent, breathtaking testaments to the power of human love ever recorded in the history of the entertainment industry. The universe, in its infinite, mysterious wisdom, did not allow him to face the darkest winter of his life by himself. Instead, the universe activated the army he had spent a lifetime building. Surrounding him today is an unbreakable, impenetrable fortress made entirely of fierce, incredibly strong women. His wife, Emma Heming Willis, has stepped out of the shadows of her husband's fame to become a warrior in her own right. She has taken on the heaviest, most agonizing burden a partner can carry, becoming a full-time caregiver. She manages his medical needs, navigates the daily, unpredictable grief of the long goodbye, and has bravely transformed her family's private pain into a massive public advocacy platform to raise awareness for FTD. Standing right beside Emma, shoulder to shoulder, is Demi Moore, the ex-wife, the former Hollywood royalty who refused to let a divorce sever the bonds of family. She is a constant, unwavering presence in the house, bringing laughter, memories, and an absolute, unconditional loyalty that defies every cynical expectation of modern romance. And then there are the daughters, Rumor, Scout, Tallulah, Mabel, and Evelyn, 5 women who span a generation, forming a protective circle around a man who used to carry them on his shoulders. When Bruce became a grandfather, when Rumor welcomed her daughter, Luetta, the world saw a photograph of the legendary action star holding the tiny infant. The words were gone, but the absolute, radiant love in his eyes was unmistakable. These women do not care that he can no longer remember his iconic lines. They do not care that the man who saved the world on screen now needs help navigating his own living room. They bathe him in patience. They hold his hands when the fog gets too thick. They sing to him. They play music for him. And they speak the words that he can no longer find. They are the guardians of his dignity. There is a profound philosophical shift that happens when we watch a man like Bruce Willis surrender to the care of his family. For decades, he taught us a very specific definition of what it meant to be a man. He taught us that a hero is someone who fights through the pain, who bleeds, who suffers in silence, and who ultimately saves everyone else. But in his twilight years, Bruce Willis is teaching us a completely different, infinitely more courageous lesson about masculinity. He is teaching us that true strength is not about holding on to control until the bitter end. True strength is the willingness to let go. True strength is having profound, terrifying vulnerability to look at the women you loved, the women you raised, and allow them to take the wheel. It is the absolute bravery of surrendering your cape, taking off your armor, and trusting that the family you built will not let you fall. It takes a tough guy to run barefoot over broken glass, but it takes a truly great man to allow himself to be helpless in the arms of his family. There is a devastating, yet deeply poetic symmetry to the geography of his life. Remember the boy from Penns Grove, New Jersey, the child who was trapped in the agonizing prison of a severe stutter. Remember how the schoolyard bullies laughed at him because his throat would lock up and the words simply refused to come out. Remember the miraculous moment he stepped onto a theater stage and suddenly the stutter vanished. Acting was the wheelchair that allowed the broken boy to run. The stage was the only place where he was granted a voice. He used that voice to conquer the earth. He used it to become a millionaire, an icon, and a legend. He wrung every single ounce of magic out of that miraculous gift. And now, as the curtain falls on his extraordinary 71 years, the magic has simply been exhausted. The universe has asked for the gift back. The words have retreated, and the silence has returned. But this silence is fundamentally different from the silence of his childhood. When he was a boy, the silence was terrifying. It was a prison made of humiliation, isolation, and fear. He was trapped inside his own mind, begging the world to understand him. Today, the silence is not a prison. It is a sanctuary. He no longer needs to struggle to find the words because his family speaks for him. He no longer needs to fight for his dignity because the women surrounding him fiercely protect it. He does not need to perform. He does not need to smirk. He does not need to save the world. He can simply rest. The legacy of Bruce Willis is not just written on the celluloid reels of Die Hard, Pulp Fiction, or The Sixth Sense. His true legacy is a magnificent, unbreakable family standing in his living room. He was the ultimate everyman who achieved impossible dreams. He was a bleeding hero who changed cinema. And in the end, he is simply a father, a husband, and a grandfather, quietly fading into the twilight, entirely and absolutely loved. The dialogue is finished. The story is complete. And the ending, though heartbreaking, is an absolute triumph of the human heart. As we close the book on the incredible, heartbreaking, and profoundly beautiful journey of Bruce Willis, the camera turns away from the Hollywood legend and it focuses on you. Bruce's story is a powerful, emotional reminder of reality that so many of us face in our own lives. The long goodbye of cognitive decline, whether it is Alzheimer's, dementia, or aphasia, is one of the most agonizing trials a family can ever endure. It is a thief that steals the people we love right in front of our eyes. But as the Willis family has shown the world, disease can steal a person's words, but it can never, ever steal their impact, and it can never erase the love they planted in the hearts of their family. What about you? Have you ever had to be the shield for a loved one whose light was slowly fading? Have you walked the difficult, exhausting, but incredibly noble path of a caregiver? When the words disappear, how do you communicate love to the people who mean the most to you? Please, take a moment to share your stories, your struggles, and your hard-earned wisdom in the comments below. There are people reading these comments right now who are walking through the very same dark fog, and your story, your resilience, might be exactly the beacon of light they need to realize they are not alone. If Bruce Willis's legendary journey moved you, if it reminded you that true heroes are not defined by how they fight, but by how deeply they're loved when the fight is over, please leave a like on this video. Share it with someone you care about, especially those who are acting as caregivers in their own families. And subscribe to our channel, because we are committed to telling the deep, unfiltered, and profoundly human stories behind the legends we thought we knew. Thank you, deeply and truly, for spending your time with us today. Remember to hold your loved ones a little tighter. Be patient with those who are struggling to find their words. And until next time, keep moving forward.